Hello all, and returning to form on the channel, I wanted to now discuss ontology and metaphysics after logical positivism. Of course, on the channel we did a look at religious and ethical language and its shifting and philosophical developments in the 20th century, and now I want to approach metaphysics and ontology. And of course, discussing logical language structures or state of affairs within language would you would see following that tradition with the likes of Aristotle and the categories of thought. And so, of course, ontology and metaphysics would make its return despite its claimed demise by the logical positivists in the decades prior. And so, as we turn now to the ontological arguments, I wanted to go in multiple videos on this discussion of ontology and the different arguments. And so, for this one, I want to look at three thinkers in particular with Frege, Popper, and Quine. And so, essentially, the arguments and topics in this video will be in regards to physical entities, mental states, and the unchanging of logical objects. Do we have real universals or essences, or in the case of logical entities or objects? And so for Frege, when he looks at language and entities, Frege makes an interesting distinction between sense and sentences, where it's not just a propositional statement. Sense is the distinction, whereas there's the reference to be in language. So there's the state of affairs, and then there's the reference to it. So sentence, which has sense, and reference, the reference that which is about. So the sense of the sentence is within its logical meaning. So a sentence, as mentioned, stands for a proposition and objective state of affairs, which of course can be capitulated in many different ways, of course in many different languages, to make statements about an objective state of affair. And so the proposition is the logical state in the meaning of a sentence that the affairs can reference to. So just like if you were named after something of significance, there's connotational meaning from that name, so the sense, and then the reference to the individual. But the sense of the proper name distinguishes itself from the reference. Sorry for misspoken there. To the individual, which is given that name. And so this could apply in the example to something like an abstraction. So sense has to do with the concept, the universal, whereas the reference is the whole set of individuals, classes, or universals. So sense in this regard has an intentional meaning, where reference is extensional. And so the extension of a noun, this is now being applied to his logic here, where a noun has extension, all men are bald, there's a universal extension. Some men are bald has the particular extension. And so, these different sort of classifications and play here within sentences for Frege can really be deduced to this binary between sense and reference. But our next thinker, Karl Popper, wants to distinguish between these two with a third proposition. The mental state, which has reflection, which is empirically derived from such reflections. What are the logical objects of that mental state? The state of affairs and the discussion of universals then are thought of and not seen in particular. So the mental state has certain words as vehicles into the essences of the logical states of affairs. So, we think about these universals, we think about these states of affairs in that sort of universal sense. And so our words then become vehicles for that. And so the logical object is the essential nature, if you will, in an example of humans. The humanness, our essential nature, is embodied with the physical object as human beings, would be the example. And then as we turn to Quine, now Quine, of course, is going to oppose what Frege and Popper has to say about logical entities or universals. Quine challenges, in fact, in an essay on logic without ontology, language doesn't need this, intention or a state of affair. Language simply is predicates and qualifiers. Predicates as the empirical reference, where qualifiers are the formal language function. So, for example, with some men are mortal, in saying some men, we reference certain physical entities, whereas mortality is an empirical property. And so some then is the logical qualifier, where some men are mortal. And so meanings then are functions of language and not just mental states. The question for Quine isn't what you're thinking of, but what are you actually referencing or talking about. And so language then is a verbal behavior. It's not just some mental state. You're not just thinking off to the side, but you're actually expressing eternally the symbols of language, where thought is a verbal behavior. And so universals, such as the description of being round or humanness, are just terms that refer to a member or a set, qualities and how they are similar. And so he has a term that I'm not going to try to butcher too bad here. The syncategorematical terms, such as roundness, are redone from universals. And so they're all members of a category together. So what is a set of similarities or a classification in the way we use our language? And so how we organize our words within the language we use to classify. We don't have a real essence to logical objects, but we observe them empirically. And the reference through language is how we come about with our classifications. And so clearly Quine, with his nominalism here, is going to say that we have no real universals, no essences. And finally, I wanted to, for the end here of our discussion on logical entities, I wanted to look at the logical entities of possible worlds with Nicholas Wolfersoft. And in his work on universals, he puts forth that universals are possibles of unchanging logical possibilities that objectively exist, that cannot be something other than what they are due to the very nature of their identity. So you can't, have a dog, with how it's bounded in its identity, and then have a non-dog, and because there's a sort of intrinsic nature to what a dog is, what is possible of a dog, and so there's possibilities through these identities, which some are made into a reality, into something that we could empirically observe, but this is only one possible. There's many possibles that could be logically deduced, and so possibles are the objective logical possibilities where there's certain ranges, which some of course are actualized in our world. And so you can see here, and interesting enough, we came to the 1-year anniversary on this channel of looking at the works of Whitehead, and Nicholas Wolfersoft here. He is using Whitehead terminology, and was ultimately influenced and did his doctorate work on Whitehead. And of course, Whitehead, famously in his system, reverses Platonism and the real things in the world being those universals, those forms, where for Whitehead, the particulars, the shadow images in the Platonic sense, the images of the real is reversed here, and so what actually is in particulars are the actual entities. So the universals aren't objective, but they are objective in their possibilities. And so with possible worlds ontology here, he then extends this to aesthetics with the works and worlds of art. And so his ontology here is underlying the view of objective aesthetic values in a universal way, and reassessing the discussion of universals through art as action, where he argues that there's an association with sounds on a universal basis across all languages, such as ping and pong. Ping sounding the feminine, and of course in languages you see across the world, there's a feminine pros and then a masculine one. And so a lot of these structures within languages, you'll see there's an association in aesthetics, according to Wolfersoft here, where objectively we can see this sort of aesthetics and qualities that we see across all languages in a universal capacity. And so, ping pong, there's a plethora of different ones, which basically gets back to his idea that there is a set logical possibles because there are entities that require to exist within a certain bounding of their own identity in this possible world. And so as we've traced here with this brief video, the range of logical possibilities of any world, then, as we'll get into in a video or two from now, the range of logical possibilities of any world, then, if we were going to discuss creation, then God then can freely choose to actualize himself within any of these possible worlds. And so, by putting in the logic of possibility for God, then you're removing its rejection, because it is something that ultimately could be possible, even if it isn't actually actualized in this particular world. And of course, some people will take this and extend it and say that God revealed himself in this actual world, and of course the burden of proof goes with that. But in this particular case, we are talking about the possibility of it, and so this removes you can't have a disbelief then, because it is something that is possible, that God could reveal himself in a possible world. And so, as we've traced here, the logical entities open up a discussion really for universals, and what are the essences of identity, and what is possible in the world with Wolfgerstoft. But yeah, this is going to put a bow on this video. I hope you guys enjoy these metaphysics seen through the lens of philosophy of language here in the later half of the 20th century. And if you like that, make sure to comment, subscribe, and like the video. And I hope you guys will join me for the next one.